Good morning, Corky Alexander here. I am going to do some remarks at this point, not directly related to guitar education, but other areas of my life at this juncture. I am 67 years old here in 2021 and living in Hamilton, Alabama. As I shared in another part of a video, back in 1969, when I started really getting serious about the guitar, my bands provided a very needed support group for me, my mother having passed away in 1965. And so for a few years there, I was very immersed in rock music, dropped out of high school and so forth. Different guitar students have asked me over the years, boy, I wished I had, the use that you have of the guitar. And what I often tell them is it'll cost you, might cost you your high school education, and might cost you relationships and everything else. So you kind of have to count the cost about that. Well, the music world is a world much like truck driving that has occupational hazards. And so back in the 70s, early 70s, I became involved in drug use and alcohol, so forth. My dad really encouraged it, and we drank together and things like that. But it ended up taking me down to a point where I'd alienated my relationships and found myself in Atlanta, Georgia with a friend sharing an apartment with me, kind of looking after me. And I had a breakdown of sorts with a lot of hallucinations and things like that. And I followed the movement that was important at that time, the Jesus movement, and I became a believer in Jesus Christ. That's not weird, and it's not that unusual. If you listen to Alice Cooper's story or many others, Richie Furay of Poco and others, you will find that most all of us, in terms of faith, make a commitment at some point, particularly those who are starting families see a need for faith and for commitment to spiritual things. And so I was very involved in Jesus movement, and I did not come to Christianity through a church. I came to Christianity through these meetings that were going on alternatively outside the church, Full Gospel Businessmen's Fellowship, the Charismatic Movement meetings, Jesus festivals, things like that. And I felt that I was going to or needed to commit the best years of my life to Christian service. And I ended up doing that for 26 years formally. Began with traveling with the gospel group, which is my father-in-law and his three daughters. One of the daughters I ended up marrying. And we traveled for several years, and I played guitar in a Southern Gospel group, and we played all over North, South Carolina, some Georgia, Virginia, even in Kentucky at one point, I think. And I played bass during the period of time when the bass player had left, and I played guitar most of the time. And, there's no substitute for experience. And we played a lot of little towns, a lot of little churches, and my family now, my extended family, my mother and father-in-law, my sister-in-law Michelle, and my wife Kim, were very, very, very musically trained, inclined, and very gifted, still are. And so I played guitar with them, utilizing basically the method of playing that I had learned by, and it was just, I think some people today call it performance-based music rather than approaching it with sheet music and standard notation and things like that. But I did learn enough music theory to get me by word of mouth. Never was trained, but I would go on to do a Bachelor of Arts degree, Lee University, Master of Divinity at Church of God School of Theology, to prepare myself for being a pastor. In 26 years, I was a pastor. Many of you knew me in that role primarily. And I praise the Lord for all the years, the souls, the lives that were changed, everything that we saw. So I'm very grateful for that time. All the while, I'm kind of putting my music aside, letting the younger guitar players in the churches play and devoting myself more to counseling and preaching and things like that. And that went pretty well. But I always knew that if I ever retired from the pastorate, that I would give special attention to the music, because I could see over the years what an impact music had in the community. You know, we sing everywhere. We sing at birthday parties. We sing at weddings. We sing at funerals. We sing at ball games. So music is a communal substance, activity. And so during the best years of my life, from about 1976 to about 2006, I was involved in the formal church, organized church. I was an ordained minister in a denomination and so forth. And I had a very good time there. I had great friends, had a great career. Before I was to make the final kind of steps up in the ministry, I looked at what it was, and the larger the churches would become, the less interested I would become, because it becomes more business oriented than personal. And so also during the 26 years, I gave careful thought to what people were not present in the church, what was the church not serving. And I have developed some convictions regarding that. So much so that I withdrew from formal church work, went into what some would call missions, although I don't like to use the word mission because it tends to connect us with a lot of wrong that was done by the church and the government when they got together. So those of you who are all trumped up, you will know that I am not in that world, because I do not like the church to become wedded to the government. I think that's always bad. I'm still an old hippie from the 60s. I still am anti-war, peace freak, and all of that. And I say that with care here in Alabama, where I'm living, as I see these Confederate flags in different places. And I'm not here to preach today to you, but just to say that there's a world of people out there that the church is not served. I went on to get a Doctor of Missiology degree at Fuller Seminary in California, majored in Native American Studies, and then gave 15 years of what I call the cool down of my career, 15 years in serving Native Americans on the reservations and so forth. The way I did this was not through traditional preaching or church missions, but the way I did this was through providing activities for Native American youth and others in the way of teaching guitar. I taught guitar at a reservation school for high school students, and I conducted bull riding camps. I did 7 of those, 4 in South Dakota, for young people who were wanting to advance their rodeo skills, which is a big thing out west. So I was out west a lot, or most of that time, and would bring in the PBR bull rider champions to do like a 3-day clinic. And they happened to be men that were spiritual and loved young people and were great mentors. And so we did that, and that was a big deal. And also during this time, I'm talking about from like 2006 to now, I also did music programs in agencies and centers that served the intellectually disabled adults primarily, although I have done programs for children. And this is another population that is not served well by the church or by the government for that matter. And so I would do programs. So I resigned the pastorate 2006, and I was immediately hired at an agency in Cleveland, Tennessee. At that time, Bradley Cleveland Services. Now it's called Life Bridges Incorporated. And it served about 150 adults with developmental disabilities, or now they call it intellectual disabilities. And I wondered if I might become a music therapist in this. Also, a large percentage of Native Americans are also developmentally disabled due to fetal alcohol. But as I visited with and was counseled by music therapists worldwide, I did this stuff in Uruguay. I've done it. I did it all in the United States. Did it in Chicago. Served agencies in South Dakota. You have to pardon my eyes. I'm not been up long, and some of us are night people. But I gave 15 years to that, and after talking to these music therapists, I discovered that they spend more time noting progress on a computer than they would like to. Many of these music therapists who become licensed play guitar or piano like that, and so there was very little time to like what you'd call jam, okay? I also saw a picture or two photos which got my attention. One was of Johnny Paycheck with one microphone acoustic guitar playing at a nursing home, and the other one was Jose Feliciano playing in a nursing home. You may not know who these people are, but they're pop stars from the past who have given their time to go into like care centers and nursing homes. And so the more that I delved into it, the more I realized that there was an open field for people who didn't necessarily want to have a hit record or necessarily wanted to perform for thousands, that there's a huge world there for people who are willing to go and bring music into the lives of people with challenges. And so I had a trio, a disability trio, and we toured the East Coast together and played prisons and hospitals and care centers, and good grief, we had a great time. We ended up at the Carter Fold in Bristol, Virginia, where the Carter family ended up, and Johnny Cash played his last performance at the Carter Fold. That was the end of our tour, and it was a very rewarding thing. I'm not bragging about these things. I'm just trying to help musicians, particularly who are discouraged because you're not getting exposure or popularity that you wish you had or opportunities. One nursing home that I served every week, 52 weeks a year, for about 8 years, I probably, and have seen the numbers, I probably did 400 programs in that nursing home. And there were 100 volunteers who would come into that nursing home at least every week to do, Bible studies and sing hymns and things like that. Out of the 100 volunteers, I was the only one who didn't do primarily gospel music. And the reason I did that, they had that covered. And that can become quite morose and sad sometimes. So people come in feeling sorry for the clients or the patients and providing these old, mournful, old-time hymns and things like that, which are beautiful hymns, and we appreciate them. I did a whole album of gospel hymns. But I was the only one out of 100 who did not primarily do gospel music, and yet I was the only one out of the 100 that was an ordained minister. Okay, so it's kind of puzzling for some of these folks, and but I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to go in there. Most of these nursing home residents were probably teenagers when Elvis was popular, so you got to give people credit for having, music knowledge. The general public are the ones who really feed on music, popular and local and all that. They're the ones who really do it, not the businessmen. So I would do rockabilly. I was able to use my skills that I couldn't really use in the formal churches often, and put together a program. Also learned a lot about music therapy, learned about movement music, how that people with disabilities need to be able to have movement in their limbs and so forth, and can do it and will do it easier with music than with anything else. And so I did 2 albums of movement music. Those of you that have searched my music on iTunes and Amazon, so forth, you probably are kind of weirded out by my Redneck Scarves album or my Blue Scarves album, but that's movement music for a particular activity that I would do in these centers, and that was scarf movement. And so I learned more and more about music therapy, but I wasn't going to be, and I'm not going to be, a licensed music therapist, because I want the time to jam, go in there and get everybody moving and have a good time, which is not a sin, I might add. So I'm making a case for music services. Guitar is portable, ukulele is portable. I play ukulele, mandolin is portable. Can go into a hospital or so forth with permission, and lead people in singing, family social music, old time songs and even pop songs. And so I'm making a case for music services. And so I'm going to go ahead and sign out now. This is maybe the longest one I've done. And I'll be back to talk about more reflections on music and vocation. Thank you. Have a great day.